Don't ignore the bark. That was the one piece of advice Sergeant Mark Hanley always told rookies. And on that dry October morning, that bark might have been the only thing keeping a child alive. The sun hadn't climbed over the ridge yet. The wind was bone dry, the kind that carried fine red dust into your eyes, your ears, your mouth. Mark adjusted his cap, squinting at the edge of the canyon. Nothing looked out of place, just boulders and brush, the aftermath of a mild rock slide the night before. Nothing except for Bruno. The 4-year-old German Shepherd was pacing, not sniffing for explosives, not trailing a scent, just pacing, ears high, tail rigid, nose twitching with every breath like something in the air wasn't right. And then he froze. His ears pivoted. Then the bark came, sharp, 3 times in a row. Then a low growl. Then silence. "Easy, buddy," Mark said under his breath, fingers tightening on the leash. But Bruno didn't budge. He was locked onto something beyond the twisted junipers and jagged shale, somewhere in a narrow crevice that looked like it hadn't seen footprints in 100 years. They weren't supposed to be here long. The sheriff's office had called for a standard perimeter check after a local school reported a student missing during a weekend field trip. Most of the kids had been accounted for by nightfall yesterday. The terrain was rugged, but this wasn't supposed to be a full-on rescue. Mark checked his radio. Static. Then a click. "Echo 1, what's your status?" "Just finishing sweep on North Sector," Mark replied. "Dogs showing signs of alertness." "Copy. Bring him in. We're wrapping in 20. Bruno barked again, louder this time, longer. Mark glanced down at the shepherd, who now had both front paws planted and was pulling slightly on the lead, just enough to send a message. "I don't think he's ready to call it," Mark muttered. He reached down, unclipped the leash, and gave the signal. "Go on, show me." Bruno bolted like a dart, low, fast, and determined, straight toward the edge of a narrow stone chute choked with broken branches and fallen rock. What happened next wasn't protocol. But after 15 years in search and rescue, Mark Hanley had learned one thing. When a dog like Bruno speaks, you listen. Bruno stopped at the base of a slope about 80 yards away, where a cluster of flat boulders sat, wedged like an unnatural puzzle. He began digging at the dirt, nose pressed against a patch of disturbed ground. Then he barked again. 3 short, insistent barks, like a code. Mark caught up seconds later, heart pounding, adrenaline rising. His boots slipped slightly on loose gravel as he crouched next to the dog. "What is it, huh?" he whispered. "What have you got?" Bruno turned and looked him square in the eye. Then he barked once, soft, controlled, like he was saying, "It's here." Mark unslung the small crowbar from his vest and started prying at the largest slab. Nothing moved. Whatever lay underneath had been pinned tight. He called for backup on the radio, this time with urgency. "Command, we've got K9 confirmation, possible entrapment, sending GPS, requesting excavation team and med evac standby." "Copy that, Echo 1. Is the missing boy confirmed?" Mark paused. "Not yet, but I've got a good feeling." He turned to Bruno. The shepherd was now lying down beside the rocks, head on his front paws. But his eyes never left the spot. Watching. Guarding. If you love real stories of heroic animals like Bruno, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals. We bring you powerful true rescues and the brave souls, both human and four-legged, who make them happen. Within 20 minutes, the first response team had arrived, and with it came tension. "You sure about this, Hanley?" the lieutenant asked, scanning the canyon. "There's no sound, no movement." Mark didn't answer with words. He just pointed to Bruno, who hadn't moved an inch in nearly half an hour. Not even a tail twitch. The dog was locked in, so they dug, hands blistered, knees scraped, the sun now fully above the horizon, one rock at a time. Then, a sound, barely audible. A whimper? A breath? No one was sure, but Bruno shot to his feet, tail wagging once, "Wait, quiet!" Mark barked. Everyone froze. Then again, a faint, muffled cough. "Jesus!" one of the volunteers whispered. "There's someone down there." A few more minutes of frantic clearing revealed a small cavity beneath the stones, just enough space for a small frame to be wedged in fetal position. A tiny shoe peeked out first, scuffed, blue-striped, then a dusty leg, then an arm. The boy was unconscious, lips cracked, face pale with bruises, but he was breathing. They had found him. 8-year-old Luke Jensen had fallen during the school's weekend hike. No one had seen it happen. His teachers thought he was with another group. His friends thought he'd run ahead. But the boy had slipped between 2 layers of limestone and triggered a small rock slide that pinned him inside a natural tomb. He'd been there for almost 20 hours. No one would have searched that part of the canyon. It wasn't even marked on the maps. No one except Bruno. As the medics loaded Luke onto the stretcher, Mark leaned down and scratched Bruno behind the ear. "You did good, buddy. Damn good." The shepherd gave one soft grunt and finally sat down, as if only now his job was done. Someone from the crowd said it aloud. "The dog just saved a kid's life." Mark didn't say anything, but he knew one thing for certain. They weren't just lucky today. They were alive because a dog refused to walk away from something that didn't feel right. Because someone listened. And because heroes? Sometimes they've got 4 legs, a nose for miracles, and a bark that won't quit. The chopper blades whirred overhead like thunder on a clear sky. From the ground, the sound echoed across the canyon walls as the stretcher carrying 8-year-old Luke Jensen was airlifted from the canyon floor. Paramedics hovered around him, adjusting oxygen tubes and checking vitals. His little fingers, still caked with dirt and bruised from gripping stone, twitched slightly as the helicopter rose out of sight. Sergeant Mark Hanley stood a few yards away, arms crossed, sweat cutting lines through the red dust on his face. Beside him, Bruno sat tall but calm, tongue lolling slightly, his harness still strapped tight against his chest. The German shepherd had earned his meal, his rest, and about 1,000 ear scratches. But Bruno wasn't the kind of dog to ask for praise. He didn't chase balls. He didn't beg for treats. He worked. He served. And this morning, he saved a child's life. The first responders cleared out slowly. Some of them patted Bruno as they passed. A few just nodded in respect, like saluting a fellow soldier. The young volunteer who'd dug out most of the rocks with his bare hands, his name was Charlie, looked at Bruno the way a kid looks at a superhero, with awe, with something like love. "You think he knew from the start?" Charlie asked, voice hoarse. Mark smirked. "He always knows. The hard part is convincing the rest of us to listen." Charlie knelt to pet Bruno again, shaking his head. "That's not a dog. That's a damn miracle on 4 legs." 2 hours later, Mark and Bruno were back at the county search and rescue headquarters. The adrenaline was fading, and so was Mark's focus. But Bruno was still alert, tail wagging softly as he paced the break room floor. Mark poured 2 cups of stale coffee, one for himself, one he left untouched for whoever wandered in next. His shoulders ached, his knees throbbed. But the thing gnawing at him most wasn't fatigue. It was what could have happened. He leaned against the counter, watching Bruno nosing at a pile of gear near the wall. A folded blanket, a cracked radio, a pair of dirt-caked gloves. Mark remembered when Bruno came to him. 3 years ago, the shepherd had been transferred from military service overseas. He'd lost his handler in a bombing. The report said Bruno had stayed by the body for hours, refusing to leave. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, just waited, loyal to the end. "They said he might never work again," Mark muttered to himself. "Guess they were wrong." Back at the hospital, the mood was very different. Luke's mother, Karen Jensen, had arrived 10 minutes after the helicopter touched down. She hadn't stopped shaking since. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the nurse's arm, eyes wide and frantic. Did he? She couldn't finish. He's alive, the nurse said gently. Still unconscious, but stable. He has a mild concussion, dehydration, a cracked rib, but no internal bleeding. You got here just in time. Karen's knees buckled, and she sank into the nearest chair. Her purse dropped to the floor without her noticing. Hands over her mouth, she sobbed, loud, broken sobs that seemed to release all the hours she had spent blaming herself. I thought he was with the other chaperone group, she whispered between sobs. I should have checked. I should have. You're here now, the nurse said. He'll wake up. He's strong. Luke opened his eyes 3 hours later. He was quiet at first, groggy, unsure, blinking against the sterile hospital lights. The first thing he said was a question, barely audible. Where's the dog? Karen leaned over, choking back a sob. You're safe, baby. I'm right here. No, the dog. The one who barked. Karen stared at him, puzzled. What dog? Luke coughed weakly. His voice was scratchy, but firm. The dog barked. I heard him. Then I knew someone was coming. The story hit the local news that same evening. By morning, it was on the national networks. K9 dog leads team to trapped boy in Colorado Canyon. Hero dog refuses to leave canyon until missing child is found. Boy survives 20 hours, trapped beneath rock slide. Thanks to Bruno, the K9. Everyone wanted the story. Everyone wanted the dog. Mark had his phone off for most of the day. He didn't care about interviews or photo ops, but his department had other plans. PR was good for funding. And Bruno? Well, Bruno was about to become a household name. On Thursday morning, a crew from a Denver TV station arrived. Mark had trimmed his beard and put on a clean uniform. Bruno got brushed and had his harness wiped down. They filmed him sitting beside Luke in the hospital room. The boy smiled for the first time in days, one hand resting gently on Bruno's back. The dog was calm, patient, like he understood this was important. The reporter asked, So what made you follow him that day? Mark hesitated. I don't know. Got instinct, I guess. Then he smiled, gave Bruno a sidelong glance. Or maybe I've just learned that sometimes the best instincts don't come from humans. That night, the YouTube video of Bruno's rescue hit 500,000 views. People from all over the country started leaving comments. This dog deserves a medal. God bless our K9 units. I cried watching this. What a brave boy and an incredible animal. Mark scrolled through them in silence. He wasn't one for attention, but he was proud. Bruno lay beside the couch, tail flicking every few seconds in his sleep. Mark looked down at him and whispered, You're not just a dog, buddy. You're a damn good partner. He meant every word. 2 days later, they received a letter from the governor's office. A formal commendation was being issued. Bruno would receive a Service Medal of Bravery, one typically reserved for police officers or fallen heroes. When Mark read the letter aloud, Bruno barked once, then trotted off like nothing had happened. Typical, Mark chuckled. Save a kid, get a medal, still expect dinner at 6. The ceremony was held outdoors in front of the county courthouse. It was a blue sky afternoon, with a breeze just light enough to rustle the American flags hanging from the pillars. A small crowd gathered. Neighbors, school teachers, first responders, kids from Luke's class. Bruno stood front and center, flanked by Mark on one side and Sheriff Delgado on the other. Luke, now out of the hospital, but still walking with a limp, handed Bruno a small blue ribbon tied around a chew toy. You're my hero, he whispered. Bruno gave a single bark. His ears perked. His tail wagged. A photographer captured the moment. A boy smiling up at the dog who saved him, and a dog quietly proud, just doing his job. That night, back at home, Mark took off his badge and unbuckled Bruno's harness. He opened the fridge, grabbed 2 grilled chicken breasts, one for him, one for Bruno, and sat down on the porch steps. The stars were just starting to appear. Bruno sat beside him, chewing contentedly. Mark looked up at the night sky, then at his dog. "You ever think about how close that kid came to being a headline?" he asked softly. "And how no one would have even looked in that direction, if not for you?" Bruno didn't answer. He just stared into the dark, ears twitching, as if listening for something only he could hear. Mark took a deep breath. "I hope people remember this wasn't luck. It was you. It was loyalty. It was heart." He reached over and ruffled Bruno's ears. "Not bad for a guy who almost didn't get a second chance." Bruno leaned into the touch, tail flicking once, and for the first time all day, Mark allowed himself to smile. It started with a photo. One shot, capturing the moment Luke Jensen slipped a ribbon around Bruno's neck at the courthouse ceremony. A boy in worn jeans, smiling through bruises. A dog, alert and gentle, eyes focused like he understood the weight of the moment. By the next morning, the photo had gone viral. Time magazine reposted it with the headline, "Loyalty on 4 legs." National talk shows were calling. A children's book publisher reached out, offering a deal for a picture book called Bruno the Brave. The mayor of a small town in Idaho offered to build a statue. And one particularly enthusiastic internet personality suggested starting a GoFundMe for Bruno's retirement. Mark Hanley didn't know what to do with all of it. He'd spent his career keeping his head down. Quiet missions, quiet exits. No medals, no headlines, just the work, just the dog. But now, Bruno wasn't just a canine, he was America's canine. And Mark? He was just trying to keep things normal. Normal, unfortunately, had changed. One morning, Mark walked into the SAR command post to find the front desk stacked with boxes, handwritten letters, toys, paintings, and chew treats from kids all over the country. One envelope, pink and sparkly, had hearts drawn all over it, and read in shaky cursive, "To Bruno, I love you, and I think you should be president." Mark chuckled. He'd probably do a better job than half the folks in office. Captain Reyes walked in behind him, coffee in hand. "Heard they want to fly you two to New York next week." "Who's they?" "Morning America, big feature, prime time." Mark exhaled slowly and looked over at Bruno, who was now chewing quietly on a tennis ball someone had mailed from Ohio. "We didn't do it for that," he said. "I know that," Reyes said. "But people need good stories, especially right now." They didn't go to New York. Mark declined politely, saying Bruno wasn't comfortable with flights. The truth was, neither of them were comfortable with stage lights. Instead, they spent the next week back on duty. Because life doesn't pause just because you get famous. People still go missing. Accidents still happen. And Bruno? He still showed up every morning like clockwork, ready to work, ears perked, waiting for the signal. Mark appreciated that more than anything. One afternoon, they responded to a call about a missing elderly hiker in a nearby forest reserve. The man had wandered off trail, his phone dead, his legs weak from old injuries. Bruno found him in under an hour, curled beneath a log, cold and scared, but alive. No cameras, no headlines, just another life saved, just another day. Later that week, Mark and Bruno visited Luke Jensen's elementary school. It wasn't planned. Mark wasn't big on appearances. But Luke's teacher had sent a handwritten letter to the department asking if Bruno the hero could stop by, just once, so the kids could meet the dog who saved their friend. Bruno wasn't thrilled to be in a room full of third graders, too many sticky fingers, too many unfamiliar smells, but he handled it like a champ. He sat calmly while Luke told his classmates about the bark that saved me, and even wagged his tail when a girl asked if he knew how to shake hands. Afterward, they walked out to the parking lot. Luke jogged beside them for a few steps before stopping short. He turned to Bruno and said, "You didn't just save me, you found me." Mark tilted his head. "You remember it?" Luke nodded. "I couldn't move. I was so scared. But I heard him. And when I heard him bark, I knew someone was coming. That's what made me stay awake." Bruno stared at the boy, calm and still. Then, without prompting, he took a step forward and gently pressed his nose into Luke's chest. Luke giggled. "See, he remembers me." Mark just smiled. "Yeah, he remembers." That night, Mark sat on his back porch with a cold beer in one hand and a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Fall had finally settled in. The trees were starting to shed, and the chill was real. Bruno lay beside him, head resting on his paws, eyes blinking slowly in the fading light. Mark glanced down. "You know what I realized, buddy?" Bruno flicked an ear.
"This whole time, people keep saying you're a hero because you barked, but that's not why. You're a hero because you stayed. You didn't leave. You waited. You knew he was there. And you made sure we knew, too."
Bruno didn't respond, but he didn't have to. Then came the letter from Luke. It arrived 3 days later, sealed in a small envelope with "For Bruno" and Mark too, scrawled in blue crayon. Mark opened it in the truck, waiting outside a firehouse. Inside was a drawing, crude but clear. It showed a boy, a dog, and a canyon. Above them, in wobbly lettering, were the words, "When I grow up, I want to be brave like Bruno." Mark swallowed hard and folded the note slowly, carefully, like it was something sacred. He reached over and rubbed behind Bruno's ear. "That makes 2 of us." In early November, Bruno was honored again, this time by the State Search and Rescue Council. The award ceremony was smaller, more low-key. No cameras, just colleagues, a few old friends, a few new ones. Mark didn't prepare a speech. He stood in front of the crowd in his dress uniform, cleared his throat, and said, "I've had a lot of partners over the years, none like him. Bruno doesn't speak, but he communicates better than most people I know. He doesn't run toward noise. He runs toward silence. And when he finds something that doesn't sit right, he doesn't give up. He stays. He stays until someone listens." He looked down at the shepherd beside him. "And that's why a little boy's alive today." A beat of silence, die Boyders, Einens, then applause. Bruno sat through it all without flinching. Thanksgiving rolled around. Mark had no family nearby, so he did what he always did. Grilled turkey breast, made too much mashed potatoes, and fed Bruno half of everything. They sat in the living room, football on in the background, fire flickering low. Mark looked at the shepherd curled up on the rug and said, "You know, I always thought I rescued you, but turns out it's been the other way around." Bruno blinked up at him. No bark, no growl, just understanding. By Christmas, the headlines had moved on. New stories, new outrage, new distractions. But at a quiet cabin in northern Colorado, a man and his dog sat side by side, watching the snow fall through the window. And somewhere in a nearby town, a little boy hung an ornament on the tree, one shaped like a German shepherd, with Bruno written in silver marker. Because heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear a vest. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs. And sometimes they change lives with nothing more than a bark and the courage to stay. Snow had come early to northern Colorado. By the second week of December, the mountains were coated in white, and the frost hung thick on pine branches like powdered sugar. The world seemed quieter this time of year, muted, like it was waiting for something to begin again. Mark Hanley didn't mind the cold. He welcomed it, actually. The cold was honest. The cold kept you awake. He zipped up his canvas jacket and whistled low. Bruno trotted out from the hallway, his collar jingling softly. They were headed to the VA base in Fort Carson, a place Mark hadn't visited in years. This time, he wasn't going for himself. He was going for Bruno. Because, for all the people wanting to talk about what Bruno had done in the canyon, no one had asked what he'd done before. But Mark had, quietly, in the background. And the answers led him here. The office was small, lined with black and white photos of working dogs, shepherds, labs, even a few Belgian Malinois frozen mid-air. jaws open wide. Mark signed his name at the front desk, showed his badge, and waited. A few minutes later, a man with a thick silver beard stepped into the lobby. "You must be Hanley," the man said. "I'm Sergeant Ray Elkins, retired, but I was Bruno's kennel commander." They shook hands, firm, respectful. "I brought him with me," Mark said, nodding behind him. Bruno padded in slowly, tail low but relaxed. He sniffed once, then walked straight to Ray and sat. Ray's expression softened instantly. "I'll be damned, he remembers." They moved into the back, where Ray had an old war room turned memory space. Medals hung beside chewed-up collars. On the far wall, there was a photo, faded but still sharp, of a young man in desert fatigues, smiling with a dog sitting alert beside him. "Bruno, and a handler. That's Staff Sergeant Colin Romer," Ray said, nodding at the photo. "Deployed with Bruno in 2018, Afghanistan, Kunar Province." Mark stared at the picture. Was he Bruno's original handler? Ray nodded. "From day one, they were tight. That bond? You can't fake it. Bruno wouldn't let anyone else near him for the first 6 months." Mark looked down. Bruno was sitting quietly, staring up at the photo. "He's been through more than people know," Mark murmured. Ray let out a long breath. Colin and Bruno cleared over 75 IED routes, found 15 live devices, saved dozens of soldiers. But on their third tour, Colin was hit by a sniper during a routine sweep. Bruno was with him, wouldn't leave the body for nearly 9 hours. We had to sedate him just to move him. Mark felt the weight in his chest. "You ever work again?" We thought he wouldn't. For months, he wouldn't respond to commands, wouldn't eat right, just stared at the door like he was waiting for Colin to come back through it. He paused, then added, "But you gave him a second chance." Mark swallowed hard. "No, he gave me one." They sat in silence for a while, letting Bruno wander the room. He sniffed an old duffel, pawed at a wooden plaque, then lay down in front of Colin's photo like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Can I ask something?" Mark said. "Of course." "Did Colin have family?" Ray nodded. "A sister teaches guitar art out up in Montana. Why?" Mark rubbed his jaw. "I think she deserves to know what Bruno's done. What he's still doing." Ray smiled, his eyes suddenly wet. "I think you're right." They drove home in silence, snow flurrying in soft circles as the sun sank behind the Rockies. Mark glanced at Bruno in the passenger seat. "You miss him," he said quietly. "I get that. Some partners never really leave." Bruno stared straight ahead. Mark reached over, resting his hand gently on the dog's back. "You kept waiting. And when the time came, you didn't hesitate. You found that boy like it was your mission all along." Bruno blinked slowly. "I think Colin would be proud." A few days later, the letter arrived. It came in a powder blue envelope with neat handwriting and no return address. Inside was a single page and a photo. The picture showed Colin as a teenager, smiling wide, arms wrapped around a younger girl who looked like she adored him. On the back it read, "Me and my big brother, 2009 Missoula." The letter read, "Dear Sergeant Hanley, thank you for reaching out. When Bruno was reassigned, I didn't know if I'd ever hear about him again. But hearing what he did, for that boy, for your team, it felt like Colin was still out there doing good." Bruno was all he ever talked about. Said he wasn't just a dog, he was his brother, in a world that didn't always make sense. He used to say, "Bruno sees things we miss." I hope you don't mind me saying this, but it's not just the dog. I think you're the right partner for him. Thank you for giving him purpose again. With gratitude, Maggie Romer. Mark folded the letter gently and slid it into the drawer beside his nightstand. Not because he wanted to hide it, but because some things, some truths, you keep close. You don't need to show the world to know they matter. On Christmas Eve, Mark and Bruno were called to assist in a search for a teenage girl who'd vanished from her parents' cabin. Snow was falling heavily. Visibility was low. The terrain was brutal. Deep drifts, frozen branches snapping underfoot. They found her after midnight, shivering beneath a pine tree, having wandered away during a fight with her dad. She'd left in sneakers and a hoodie. Bruno picked up the trail in 20 minutes. She was cold, scared, and barely able to speak. Mark wrapped his coat around her and radioed for evac. Bruno stood close, pressing against the girl's side to keep her warm until the snowmobile arrived. She kept whispering something over and over. "Good dog, good dog, good dog." When they returned to the station, the team clapped. Some even cheered. But Bruno didn't want applause. He walked straight to his mat in the back corner, curled up, and sighed like he'd just finished a long chapter in a book no one else had read. Mark sat beside him, back to the wall, letting the room fade away. "You know what I think?" he said softly. Bruno's ears twitched. "I think you're still on Colin's mission. Every time you find someone, every time you refuse to give up, it's like you're honoring him. You didn't lose him. You carried him with you." Bruno exhaled slowly, then laid his head on Mark's lap. And that night, for the first time in years, Mark Hanley let the tears fall. Not because he was broken, but because he'd finally understood the quiet way grief turns into purpose. The phone rang just before 7 a.m. Mark Hanley was halfway through his second cup of black coffee, watching the snow pile against the porch steps, when the call came in from a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. But something made him pick up. "Hanley." A soft, familiar voice responded on the other end. Tentative, almost nervous. "Hey, Sergeant Hanley? It's Luke Jensen." Mark sat upright, his mug clinking against the counter. "Well, hey there, kid. It's good to hear your voice." A pause. Is Bruno okay?" Mark looked down. The shepherd was lying near the fireplace, stretched out in his usual regal sprawl, chin on his paws. "He's just fine," Mark said. "Still sleeping off a long weekend shift. We tracked a lost hunter in the national forest on Saturday. Bruno didn't quit until we found him. Cold, tired, but breathing." He smiled. "Your dog still got it." Luke gave a nervous chuckle, then grew quiet again. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure thing. I've been writing a speech for school. We're doing a hero essay. Everyone picked, like, Lincoln or Harriet Tubman or whatever, but I picked Bruno." Mark's throat tightened. Luke continued. "Would it be okay if I came and saw him again? I'd like to take a photo with him for the presentation, but mostly, I just want to see him." Mark nodded slowly, even though Luke couldn't see it. "I think he'd like that," he said. "When were you thinking?" "Tomorrow, if that's okay." Mark smiled. "Tomorrow works just fine." The next day was crisp and clear, not a cloud in sight. Mark stood on the porch, jacket zipped high, arms crossed, watching as a silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Karen Jensen stepped out first, brushing snow from the windshield. Then Luke emerged, taller now, face rounder, eyes bright behind black glasses. He was still just a kid, but he looked older than Mark remembered. Grief does that to people, Mark thought. It accelerates the soul. Bruno, sensing company, got up from his bed and trotted toward the front door, tail swaying gently. Luke spotted him instantly and ran forward. No hesitation, no awkwardness. "Bruno!" he called. And Bruno did something rare. Something Mark hadn't seen him do with anyone else since Colin. He whimpered, a soft, high-pitched, joyful sound. Luke dropped to his knees in the snow and threw his arms around the shepherd's neck. Bruno pushed his face into the boy's chest, tail wagging, ears back. Karen stood off to the side, wiping her eyes. "I think he remembers," she whispered. Mark nodded. "They both do." They moved inside, warmed up with hot cocoa and coffee, and Luke shared his speech notes, scribbled in pencil on wrinkled notebook paper. "I'm not a great writer," he admitted. Mark read the page slowly. It didn't need polish. It didn't need fancy words. It was perfect. "My hero doesn't talk. He doesn't wear a cape. But he listens. When no one else could hear me, he did. When I was trapped, scared, and alone, it was Bruno's bark that gave me hope. But he didn't just bark. He stayed. He stayed until someone listened. That's what heroes do, and that's why I want to be like him. After the cocoa was gone and the fire had burned low, Luke asked if they could take a walk. Just me and him? He asked. Mark hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Stay on the trail behind the cabin. Don't go far. Karen gave him a grateful look. Bruno walked beside Luke like he'd never left his side, not needing a leash, just a quiet, invisible thread between them. They disappeared into the woods. Mark stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, heart thumping louder than it should. They were gone nearly 30 minutes. When they returned, Luke's cheeks were red from the cold, but his smile could have melted snow. He still remembers the canyon, he said. He walked beside me the whole way, even stopped once and looked up at the ridge, like we were back there. Mark smiled. You okay? He asked. Luke nodded. I think I finally am. A week later, Mark got a call from Luke's school. We're doing a community event, the principal explained. Local heroes. Luke nominated Bruno. We'd love it if you both could come. Mark agreed, though he kept his expectations low. He wasn't prepared for what he saw when they walked into the auditorium. A huge banner hung across the back wall. Welcome our hometown hero, Bruno. Kids wore paper dog ears. Teachers passed out Bark for Bruno buttons. There was even a bone-shaped cake for him, made of peanut butter and oats. Bruno didn't seem thrilled about the attention. But when Luke walked on stage with his microphone, Bruno trotted up beside him and sat tall. The crowd went silent. Luke held the mic with both hands, voice shaking just a little. I used to think heroes had to be loud, he said, like the kind that break down doors or fly through the sky. He looked at Bruno. But sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stay. Stay when it's scary. Stay when everyone else gives up. Stay because someone might be depending on you. He paused. And that's what Bruno did for me. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. That night, back at the cabin, Mark and Bruno sat by the fire again. Mark gave him an extra helping of grilled chicken. Bruno didn't seem surprised. You've changed that boy's life, Mark said. Twice now. Bruno looked up, blinked slowly, and leaned into Mark's hand. You're more than a working dog. You're a guardian. You're family. And for the first time in a long while, Mark didn't feel like he was talking to a dog. He felt like he was talking to a friend. A week later, an email arrived from Maggie Romer, Colin's sister. She'd watched Luke's speech online. I cried through the whole thing, she wrote. It reminded me of what Colin used to say about Bruno. That he didn't just protect people, he gave them the courage to protect themselves. I don't know what you believe, Mark, but I think Bruno's still carrying my brother with him. And now maybe he's passing a piece of that strength to Luke, too. Mark closed his laptop and stared out the window. The world was quiet again. But in his chest, he felt something stir. Hope, maybe pity, or peace. Later that month, Luke and his mom returned for one last visit before school started back up. They brought a gift, a wooden plaque, carved by hand, with a photo of Bruno in the canyon. At the bottom, it read, A hero's bark echoes forever. Mark hung it above the mantel. Bruno sat beneath it, tail thumping once like a seal of approval. That night, as snow began to fall again, Mark said what he hadn't said before. I don't know how many more missions you've got in you, old boy, he said softly. But if today was the last one, you've done more than enough. Bruno looked up, eyes calm, wise, like he already knew. He rested his head on Mark's boot and closed his eyes. Outside, the woods were silent. Inside, a boy slept peacefully. A mother smiled softly in the dark, and a man leaned back in his chair, content, at last, to know he had witnessed something truly rare. A quiet kind of heroism, one that never asked for anything, and changed everything. 10 years passed, and still, when the wind blew through the pine trees outside the old rescue station in Larimer County, folks said you could almost hear a bark echoing across the canyon walls. Some swore it was just the wind. Others knew better. Inside that same station, now renovated with polished floors and a small memorial wall near the front desk, sat a young man in uniform. His nameplate read L. Jensen. The name meant little to the newer guys, but to the veterans it stirred memories. Luke Jensen had grown taller, broader-shouldered, and calm in the way of someone who had known loss early and found strength through it. He was 21 now. His boots were laced tight. His canine vest was clean. His badge, newly pinned, still had the protective film over it. But none of that was what made Mark Hanley proud. No, what made him proud was the shepherd sitting at Luke's side, not Bruno. Bruno had passed peacefully in his sleep 3 years ago, his head resting on Mark's lap, the fire burning low and his leash had never tugged again. But the dog sitting next to Luke now? Her name was Daisy. She was lean, sharp-eyed, with jet-black fur and ears that stood like tiny radars, and she was trained by the best. Mark still worked with the team, though mostly in advisory roles now. His knees weren't what they used to be. His back made all kinds of noises when the weather shifted, but he came by the station most mornings to drink burnt coffee and swap stories with the younger handlers. When Luke walked into the room that day, first official mission briefing in uniform, Mark just grinned. "Look at you," he said, shaking his head, "all grown up. You eat breakfast this morning, or are you going to pass out halfway up the ridge?" Luke smirked. "Had eggs, toast, and 3 cups of gas station coffee. I'm ready." "And Daisy?" Luke looked down at the shepherd. "She was ready before I was." Mark chuckled. "That's how you know she's the right one." The call came through an hour later. "Hiker missing near Devil's Thumb Trail. Left yesterday afternoon. Didn't return by nightfall. Cell signal lost. Temperatures dropping fast." Mark watched from the operations trailer as Luke and Daisy loaded up the rig. He didn't say much, just handed Luke a scarf. "Bruno's scarf." "You sure?" Luke asked, voice low. Mark gave a slow nod. "It belongs out there, not folded in a drawer." Luke tied it gently around his neck and got in the truck. Mark stood out in the cold, one hand raised as the truck pulled away. Same road, same mission, new generation. They found the hiker by nightfall. An older man, mid-60s, who had slipped down a ravine and broken his ankle. He was shivering, weak, and near hypothermic when Daisy began barking at the edge of the trail. Luke didn't hesitate. He followed her down the slope, guided only by her instincts and her nose. When they reached the man, Daisy laid down beside him, pressing against his side, warming him just like Bruno had done for Luke so many years ago. Mark watched the rescue unfold via drone footage back at HQ. He leaned in close to the screen, blinking faster than he wanted to. "Attaboy," he whispered, "just like your old man." 2 weeks later, Luke was officially awarded his first K9 Chief's Commendation. The story made the local paper. The headline read, "Boy saved by dog now becomes one." They framed it and hung it beside Bruno's plaque at the station wall. Mark took a photo of the moment, Luke standing beneath it, Daisy sitting tall beside him, and emailed it to Maggie Romer. She replied just one line. "That dog lit a fire and now it's still burning." Life moved forward. Luke became a reliable handler, steady, humble, and calm under pressure. He didn't chase the spotlight, didn't care about medals or interviews. He just worked. Sound familiar? The folks in town started recognizing Daisy's bark like they once had Bruno's. School kids started calling her Bruno's niece. Mark never corrected them. It felt right somehow. Karen Jensen, Luke's mom, eventually moved closer to town. She became part of the department's outreach team, speaking at schools, helping families who'd lost loved ones to the wilderness, and coordinating volunteers. One afternoon, after a storm cleared the hills, Mark and Luke stood together on the back porch of the cabin. Same porch Bruno had once guarded, same view of the woods, same crisp air. "I still remember that bark," Luke said. 10 years, and I still hear it when it's quiet enough." Mark smiled. "Some sounds don't fade." Luke turned. "Do you ever miss it? The field work?" Mark nodded slowly. Every day. But I don't worry anymore, because now I get to watch someone else carry the torch.
Luke looked down at Daisy. She's not him.
No, Mark said. She's herself. But she carries what he gave us. That instinct, that loyalty, that heart. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Luke asked a question he'd never asked before. Do you think he knew it would lead to this? That finding me would change all of this? Mark looked up at the stars. I don't know if dogs understand the future like we do, but I know they understand people. Bruno chose you, just like he once chose Colin. That matters. Luke smiled. I hope I make him proud. You already did, Mark said, the day you came back. That winter, the station held a memorial ceremony for Bruno. They unveiled a bronze statue, a life-sized replica of him mid-stride, ears alert, nose forward. The plaque beneath it read, he barked, and the world listened. Canine Bruno, service dog, search partner, lifesaver, forever family. Luke gave the closing words. He didn't write a long speech, just stood there in his uniform, scarf tucked into his vest, Daisy by his side. He spoke into the mic, calm and steady. Bruno didn't save me so I could be famous. He saved me so I could live. And now, I get to do the same. For others. He turned to the statue. I hope you know, wherever you are, I'm still listening. That night, Mark sat alone on the porch after everyone left. He stared out into the trees. Snow was falling again, quiet and steady. And then, somewhere in the stillness, he thought he heard it. A single bark, far off, echoing through the ridge. He smiled and whispered, Good boy. Thank you for following Bruno's story. A journey of loyalty, second chances, and the quiet ways animals can shape our lives forever. Now we'd love to hear from you. Do you believe dogs like Bruno can sense things we can't? Have you ever had an animal change your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the Heroes for Animals channel for more powerful, true stories like this one. We'll be waiting with wagging tails and open hearts.